This is Eric. I'm going to talk about some advanced CartoCSS techniques. While doing that, I'm going to use CartoDB to host my data and my maps while I work on this. And I'm going to use some data from a recently released project called Inside Airbnb. That's at insideairbnb.com. And the person who made this scraped a bunch of data from Airbnb over a couple of days in January of 2015 and made all of the data available right here. So you can look at it through their map, or you can go up to the top to get the data, and the file we want is NYC listings, this one right here. On the right it says it's good for visualizations. So we want this one. Download that and upload it to your CartoDB account. I have mine right here. And I'm going to open it. I'm going to rename it to just Airbnb. That will make some things a little bit simpler later. Already taken. Taken by what? Okay. Okay, so I'm just calling it Airbnb too. Call it whatever you like. I am going to go ahead and I'm going to go straight to a visualization, and I'm going to call this one Airbnb. Hopefully it lets me do that. Yes, okay, so it's Airbnb 0. Alright, so I'm in a visualization. If you're not aware, with CartoDB you want to create your public views as visualizations always. So I am just going to go straight into that. We have some interesting data here. How many days a year is the property, the apartment or home available? So 322 out of 365 days, and so on. This one's only available 6 days out of the year. You can see the minimum number of nights that the person posting the apartment will allow you to rent it for. You can see reviews. You can see the price. That's going to be a huge one. I'm going to play with that a bit. And let's see, neighborhood exists here, and the type of room. Okay, so let's get on with it in the map view. So from the map view, first we end up with just points because it's the most basic thing. You can do things like categorize by, say, the room type, and that can show you places that are entire homes or apartments, a private room in an apartment, or a shared room. But what I want to talk about today is more advanced CartoCSS techniques. And the first one I want to look at is conditions. So with CartoDB, you can use a visualization wizard, and that's going to generate a bunch of CartoCSS for you. And you can find that by clicking on this button in the sidebar. So we see that it's created this CartoCSS for us. If we, say, wanted the points to get bigger over a certain price, then we do that with square brackets. So you open square brackets and you say price greater than or equal to, say, 50. And then we change the points. So maybe I want the marker fill to be green. And when I hit save, you see that a lot of them are greater than 50. Okay, that's pretty basic CartoCSS. I want to take it another step. So what if I wanted only to mark things green when they're within a certain price range, say between 50 and 100? Then to do that, you just add another condition right after the existing one. So we have this one. I'm going to add another and say price less than or equal to 100. So that restricts the number of points that we're selecting. We're selecting only those that are both over 50 and below 100. So anything under 50 or over 100 will not be selected. So we see that while most of the points are over 50, a decent number of them are also below 100. That's something. You don't have to always do this as a range. Say we want to also look at neighborhoods at the same time. So you can use other attributes on your features here. I'm going to say where the neighborhood is Bedford-Stuyvesant. And when I hit save, you see that we get a cluster of markers colored right here in the area that many consider to be Bed-Stuy, and only the ones that cost over $50 are highlighted. So there are some in the neighborhood below 50. We could bump this up and kind of see where the expensive places are in the neighborhood. Over 250, there are a few. Yeah, so that is how you combine conditions in CartoCSS. You could also throw in zoom here. Any conditions that you would write in square brackets, you can do here. So I could say zoom greater than 14. And when I hit save, all of those green dots disappear and become orange again. But if I zoom in one more to 15, you see the green dots come back. So now our style says only when the zoom is over 14 and the price is at least $250 and the neighborhood is Bed-Stuy are we selecting and coloring these markers. Okay. So sometimes when you're combining conditions, you actually don't want to say, you don't want to make your conditions more restrictive. Sometimes you want to include other things. For example, if I had two neighborhoods that I want to look at, say I want to look at Bed-Stuy and Bushwick, I could go back to just Bed-Stuy, and when I hit apply, all of those points in that area get colored. You see along the edges there's some uncertainty. I think that's because of how the locations are anonymized in Airbnb, but it might also have something to do with how the neighborhood boundaries are defined. So remember, we're just going by attributes in the table. We're not checking to see if the points are in a certain polygon. Okay? So the easiest way to do this is just to copy and paste. So I'm copying the Bed-Stuy condition, and in here I'm setting it to Bushwick. Right? That works. That's fine. That's it's fine until you say, oh, but I want those to all be this purple. And then I have to either copy this code here and move it down here and do it poorly. See, it's hard, it's painful. Usually what you want to do is make all your style changes in one place and then set the conditions so that those styles actually take place. And the way I'm going to do it when I want to say either or is I'm going to, after the first condition, so I'm going to delete these styles. after the first condition, I put a comma. And usually I'm going to put, when I have commas involved, I'm going to put each condition on their own line. So now when I hit save, yep, it works exactly as planned. And this is nice because when I want to add more things, I just copy this one line and I can say Clinton Hill and see even more points light up, right? So that is how you combine conditions when you want to include more things. These commas are like saying or. The point is in Clinton Hill or Bed-Stuy or Bushwick. If we got rid of these commas, remember what we were just talking about was combining conditions in a restrictive way, we shouldn't see anything light up now. So it says that's invalid, and that's part of why it's invalid is we're saying the neighborhood has to be Clinton Hill, and also it has to be Bed-Stuy, and also it has to be Bushwick. That's not often what you want in a case like this. Okay. So if I wanted to restrict filters conditions after creating this kind of condition, where I'm combining them as an or, I can do that inside the curly braces for the statement. So I can say, and the price is over, oh, let's say 500. There are some really expensive ones in here. And when I hit save, oh, there are only a few, but there are definitely some above 500. I'm going to reduce the opacity for the points to 0.5. Oh, that's the line, right? So I want the fill opacity to be 0.5 also. And I'm going to bump up the opacity down here. And as you can see, this is when, or in my opinion, this is when indentation starts to be very important. So we have these conditions, which are saying which neighborhood do we want it to be in, and then we have this extra condition, which is saying which price we want them to be, and then finally we have the properties here. And it can be really helpful to see, oh, these properties apply to this condition and this combined condition. Okay? So that is how you combine conditions to make more complex CartoCSS. What I want to do next is look at variables. So when let's see if I can undo back to there. Yeah, here, exactly. So let's make it Clinton Hill also. So remember I said you could do things this way. You could do it in such a way that you're repeating this color, but that gets kind of annoying because when you want to change the color, you have to change it everywhere. There's actually another way around that other than combining the conditions with commas. What you can do up here is say, you can make a variable. And let me make this slightly bigger. That might help a little bit in the video. So you start a variable with the @ sign, and you give it whatever name you want. As long as it doesn't start with a number, you should be fine. So I'm going to say selected color, all one word, and I'm going to put a colon, like it's a property, and then I'm just going to copy this over, this purple. and I end it with a semicolon. And then down here where I used to have that color, I'm going to say at selected color. And I'm just going to copy this and do it for each one. And when I hit save, it should be exactly the same. So that's nice because then I can go up here and I can change this to maybe more of a red, and it changes it for each one. So basically you can imagine, if you imagine CartoDB looking at your code, so it's reading your code, it says, okay, I'm styling Airbnb 2, I'm setting this property, I'm setting this property, blah, 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 blah. And then it gets down here to marker fill, and it says, okay, I need a color for marker fill, but all I have is this variable. It goes back up in your code, and it finds where the variable is created, right here. And it basically just replaces that with the color. And it's going to do that for each of these. So that's variables. You can use variables for pretty much anything that you're doing in CartoCSS. So if you wanted the marker width, I could say width is 15. On its own, it doesn't do anything, but down here I could replace that 10 with width. And it makes everything bigger. And then if I want to say, make things bigger for in Clinton Hill, I could say marker width. And I don't even have to know how big the original markers are. I can just say at width times 2. So I want them to be twice as wide. These are going to get pretty big, I think. Yeah, so you can pretty easily see where that's happening now. Okay, so variables are nice because you can change them in one place and it changes everywhere, but they're also nice because you can do math on them and you don't have to necessarily keep track of what that value is. And if this value changes later, say to 10, the markers we want to be bigger are still twice as big. Okay? So that's pretty much variables. Remember to start them with an @ sign and give them a name that you're going to remember. Insert a colon. I did not mean to do that. Space, and then the value, semicolon. Exactly like you're setting a property, except it has to start with the @ sign. And then when you want to use it later, make sure you start with the @ sign and name the variable. So there's one other thing that I ought to mention, and that is that there are functions that you can use on colors, and that can be really handy. So let me get rid of this width. It's a little nonsensical. So let's say I have these lines around my markers, and let's say instead of making them always white, I want them to just be the same color as the fill color, in this case selected color or this color. I want them to be the same color as that, but lighter. The nicest way to do this, so one way you could do this is say marker line color, and then say F8 for F40, and then pick a lighter color, right? That's the most obvious way to do this, and it's not terrible. It should work. Why is that blue? Why is this blue? It shouldn't be blue. Okay, that's not exactly lighter. That's lighter. Okay, that's kind of what I'm talking about, right? But you would have to do this for everyone, and then when this color changes, you have to change this color. Sometimes that's not what you want to do. Sometimes you want that to be automated, and the way you automate that is you use a function. So let's look at the CartoCSS reference. That's here. And I'm going to search for functions. Here we go. Okay, so there is a section. It's very close to the end of the page. The section is called color, and it talks about the color formats that are allowed, but it also, and let me make this bigger. Let me make this bigger, and now you can see that you can lighten and darken colors using lighten and then in parentheses the color, comma, some percentage, how the percentage you want to lighten or darken it by. Okay, so let's say, for example, in Clinton Hill, I want to have the selected color for the line, and you can use variables in here, but I want to lighten it by 75%. When I hit save, oh, lighten. I was misreading it. Lighten and darken. Okay, so I'm going to replace this with N. Okay, so it's pretty hard to tell the difference right now, probably because I lightened it so much that it's white. So I'm going to say 15%. And now you can see that it is roughly, it's the same color, but a little bit lighter. There are other things you can do, such as saturate and desaturate. I kind of like the spin function, so you're spinning around the color wheel. So let's say you don't do that by percentage, you do that by degrees. So let's say I want 60 degrees or 120 degrees. Okay, so this is nice because then when this selected color changes, then those outlines are also going to change. Okay? So you don't necessarily need to use variables in here, but it's a handy side effect of using variables that you can then use functions with the variables, and then a lot of your styles are automated, and all you have to do is change a couple of things up here and it totally changes the appearance of your map. So that is why I like variables. Okay, this is getting kind of ugly. I'm going to reduce things down a little bit. Remember, I'm going back to conditions separated by commas. It should be roughly the same, except the outlines won't be quite as crazy. Okay, so I had one other thing that I wanted to talk about, and that is I would like to show you how to use attributes on fields in your CartoCSS. So far we've been using things like variables, or we have been just typing out the values that we want directly. Sometimes it's nice to have your settings be relative to the actual data that is in the table. That's, for example, and this is the example I'm going to use, but for example, sometimes you don't want to manually set the size of the marker for each individual point or for every possible range on that value. So say like the price is over $50 but under $100, make it this big. The price is over $100 but below $200, make it this big. The price is blah blah blah. What you might want to do is just make it relative to the actual value. And the way you do that, and I'm just going to do this in the 3 neighborhoods we have selected because it'll be a little bit easier to look at. is I'm going to set the marker width. And remember, right now we have @width as the variable. For what we could do is if you put, so we're using square brackets again. This is not a condition. This is going to use one attribute from your table, where an attribute is a column. So I'm going to pick price because that is the most interesting one to me. Okay, so this is saying make the marker width the price. Some of the prices are really large, so it's going to look kind of silly. I'm going to hit save. So clearly some of the prices are so large that they're overwhelming the map a lot. That's so obnoxious. So that's really not ideal. What I would recommend when you have something like this going on is you can do math on it exactly as you can with variables. You can say the price divided by, let's start at 100 and see what happens. That's really interesting. Wow, these are gigantic still. I'll select fields so that I can see what's going on here. What's the price of this one? 8,000. Got it. Yeah. So this isn't the greatest because you can see tiny specks of a ton of Airbnbs that are cheaper than 8,000. So I'm going to make it 50 and see if that clears things up any. A little bit, but it's still makes it really clear that we have a couple of outliers here. I am going to cut it in half again. Okay, that's getting a little bit more readable, perhaps. At least you can still see, some of the smaller ones popping up. And as you can see, I'm not really sure what's going on here. I think some of these bubbles are so big that CartoDB is having a hard time with them. But it's nice, you can see at a glance how cheap or expensive the relative places are. Even these places that are right next to each other. You can see that this one's very large and then there are just specks here. Okay, so that is how you use attributes in your CSS, in your CartoCSS, I should always say. You use square brackets, and I know square brackets, that's a little confusing because you use square brackets up here for the conditions. But remember that you can use square brackets here, and you could do this for any numeric column. Another time when you see attributes from your table being used in CartoCSS is when you use labels. The quickest way to get a label going is to go into the visualization wizard, pick simple, and pick the label text column. In this case, I want to do price. I think that's interesting. And you can adjust all of this stuff here, so you can make the font larger, say, oops, and you can change the color, green of course, and in the CartoCSS I'm going to wipe out the points and let it just be the labels, and you can see right here in square brackets you have the price, and that is, so for every feature, when it's setting the text, it's going to have to look in the price column and it will pick out whatever text it can find there. So as I showed earlier, you can do operations on these things. So if I want a $sign first, I can do it like this. It gets really cluttered because the text size is so large. Let's take it back down to 10. And maybe price greater than 500. Make it larger so we can actually see it. Text size 20. And I forgot my opening brace there. And when I hit save, you can see the bigger ones start to pop up like that. I could say text name make it kind of shout at you when they're very expensive places. I could decide to make, yeah, you can do other things with these attributes in your CartoCSS. I encourage you to mess around with those and push the limits of it. There are definitely some places where they're just not going to work out for you. Some properties just won't take these attributes, and you'll see an error pretty quickly when you try to do that. I'm not going to be able to list all of those, and those change pretty frequently. So that's about all I can say about it for now. Okay? So just a quick recap, we talked about combining conditions in CartoCSS, both to restrict the features that you select. So you can say this condition and this condition. Remember that those go right next to each other in square brackets. Or you can say this condition or this condition, and then you have a comma between them. You can use variables to reduce repetition in your code and also make your code more dynamic. You can use color functions, and that's going to be something you'll want to look up in the documentation. And by the way, the documentation is at this question mark here, and then there's a link to it. Okay? And finally, as I was just talking about, you can use attributes from your data, from your features, in your values in your CartoCSS when you're setting properties. Okay? And that is a lot of what there is to know about CartoCSS. I hope it was informative for you, and have fun.